I've read 12 books so far this year, and only 2 of them were below 4 stars, which means I'm incredibly excited to talk about my Q1 reading wrap-up. I started the year off incredibly strong with a 5-star read, which was Vicious by V.E. Schwab. This book was fantastic. This book was so fun. I love reading fantasy books where the fantasy elements are really well linked and entwined with science, where they're linked in physics and biology and research, where it's not just, the typical fantasy that I enjoy reading, where it's, this person's born with magic or it's a completely new world. This was so good. The best way I can explain it without giving you any spoilers is it's about 2 young, incredibly intelligent boys who are trying to write their thesis for the end of the year, and they are doing research into the existence of extraordinaries by experimenting on themselves and their lives, and upon discovering the existence of extraordinary supernatural beings, progress throughout life. And the story oscillates back and forth. It's a non-linear narrative because it's back into the future and the past, and it's a 10-year time difference between when they are best friends and doing this experiment and when they are nemesis who hate each other and are on the hunt for one another, trying to avoid each other but also trying to kill each other. I'm gonna be real with you, every 3 pages I kept questioning why they were not canonically gay, and I still believe they are canonically gay, because some of the things that are in this book, some of the lines that I was reading, I had to message my friend 10 pages into the story and be like, hey, are these guys gay? And she said, apparently not. Well, I finished the book. Apparently, I fear they might be. But the book was phenomenal. The writing was stunning. I'm really such a big fan of V.E. Schwab. I feel like I cannot pick up any of her books without being so deeply sucked into them that I can't put them down until I'm done. This book would have broken my rating scale. But I haven't read the sequel, so I don't know. I like to rate series a lot of the time as a combined series, so when I'm done reading the series, I will say whether or not it broke my rating scale. The next book I read was All Better Now by Neal Shusterman, and I gave this a very solid 4-star read. It could have been a 3.8, 3.9, but I was feeling generous and I rounded up and I gave it a 4 stars. And it was really quite an interesting book. The premise of the book is, if you had the option of being content for the rest of your life, but the risk was dying, would you take that risk? And so it's essentially, there is this COVID-type virus that is sweeping the nation, sweeping the world, where when you get the virus, you get incredibly sick. If you survive this virus, you are content for the rest of your life. Nothing matters. Money, success, careers, looks, nothing matters except for your contentness. You are happy. You are elated. The world is beautiful and kind. But if you don't survive the illness, you die. Would you be willing to take that risk? And that is what this story explores. There are groups of people who are attempting to infect as many people as they possibly can. And there are groups of people who are trying to kill this virus immediately, because the economy and capitalism and society doesn't benefit if everyone is content with the way they live, if everyone is willing to live in a community where they farm and they gather and they take care of each other without money, without finances. All of this, I think the characters are really well fleshed out. I think the plot line was spoken about in a really nice way. But it just wasn't a 5-star read for me. But it was good. The next book was the first book of the year that was not a 4 or a 5-star read, and that was, I'm scared to say it, Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I'm sorry, I didn't like it. I don't know what to tell you. I purposefully decided to read this on my girls' trip to Italy because I thought, what better place to read a rom-com than in Italy with the girls? And you can ask any of the girls there how little I actually enjoyed this book. When I went into it, based on the responses and the reviews that I was seeing for this book, I was expecting a funny story by Emily Henry. I was expecting a You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogle. I was expecting a fun rom-com. And I'll give the author grace. There were moments in this book where I was laughing. There were moments in this book where I was giggling. There were moments in this book where I felt, wow, this character feels real to me. But that was about 10% of my reading process, and everything else was not enjoyable. There were lines that I was reading in this book that felt very clearly snipped up from TikTok. There were lines in this book that felt very clearly to me snipped out of TikTok dialogue and TikTok discourse. There was the main character's best friend who continuously reiterated this idea of not dating men with a J name. And it's like, okay, it was funny the first time, but please stop bringing TikTok videos into my stories. Please stop bringing social media into my stories. There was actual references to TikTok, to, like pop culture things, which is like, fine, I guess I can put up with it if the rest of it wasn't as unbearable. There were moments, they were on their first date, and this isn't a spoiler, but like, You're on your first official date with someone and you are going directly into trauma dumping when it wasn't needed. I'm reading this book and they're just having a fun, cute date. And he asks one question and bam, childhood trauma thrown in. I don't know how to tell you this. If you are trauma dumping on a first date with someone who you don't really know that well, you're probably not going to have a second date. On top of that, the way that they would miscommunicate with each other, or the way that they would go about the things that affected them personally, just didn't feel real, made me roll my eyes. And then more and more TikTok lines came in. And then if it wasn't lines I'd already seen on TikTok, it was lines that I know for a fact the author was sat there writing it and said, they're going to eat this up. And I don't like it. And a lot of people did. You know, this is not me hating on the author. This is not me hating on people that enjoyed the book. It's just the reason I did not like this book and I couldn't possibly in my right mind rate it more than 2 stars. You know, it was like, I'm reading this book and the dialogue is fantastic and the conversation is really going in a good direction. And then one of the characters just goes, maybe home is the people you meet along the way. This was not needed. This conversation was incredibly potent. This was a really good turning point in their relationship. And I was really getting invested again until you ruined it. And I don't know why you did that. So I didn't enjoy it. It was very anticlimactic. The times when it was good, it was really good, which is why I'm so harsh with why my rating is so low, because it was really good for 10% of the story. And then 90% of it was just disappointing. But I was quickly saved by another Jimenez when I read The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. This book absolutely destroyed my rating scale. I don't know how best to explain it to you. This book has completely redefined what the fantasy genre means to me. It has shown me what can be achieved when authors truly just break the barriers placed on them within a certain genre. I don't know how best to explain it to you. It was confusing in the best way possible. I don't know if you remember what it felt like that first time you read your first ever fantasy book, but that is what this felt like. I felt every single page, I did not know what was going to happen next. It had the mystery and the allure that fantasy books are supposed to have, but I feel like a lot of fantasy books now follow a very specific system, and that's fine. You know, I've written a fantasy book, and I feel like mine also follows that very specific system. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I think that when you finally read a book that doesn't follow this system, and you experience this breath of fresh air, it's almost impossible to look back. The story has 3 narrators. The first one is in second person, being told directly to you as your grandmother is telling you the story of your ancestors and your mythology. The second narrator is the main narrator, which is the third person overarching narrative of the story. And the third narrative is a first person collective narrative, where it's sort of, imagine the story is being told and it's saying, they did this and they did that. And then that first person weaves in, which is actually the spirits of the people who were there at the time that the story is being told. So let's say I'm saying the 2 men walked down the street. The third narrative comes in being like, we watched them do it, but we didn't want them to see us. And it's phenomenal. It was unputdownable in the best way, but it wasn't one of those fantasy books that you pick up and you read in a few sittings. This took me weeks to read, but I would not do it in any other way, because that first stanza of the story also is incredibly difficult to get through, not because it's hard to read, but because you're trying to understand the narratives, you're trying to understand how to get it, but you get to around maybe page 80, page 85, where it just clicks. And there's absolutely no turning back. A brief overview of the story is basically 2 young warriors helping the moon goddess who has fallen from the sky escape a tyrannical kingdom in the most magical, fantastical, beautiful ways possible. And also, some of the most stunning prose I've ever read in my life. But The Spear Cuts Through Water absolutely destroyed my rating scale. Next was a poetry collection called Homegrown by Maureen Onwanali. She's actually a friend of mine. We met at some of our poetry nights. She is an incredibly talented spoken word poet, and if you don't already know her, I'm going to put her Instagram maybe in my bio or on this video, wherever it is that will be easiest for people to access. She's a phenomenally talented woman, and this was just her little magazine collection of poetry, and it was so beautiful. I then read Small Worlds by Caleb Azuma Nelson, which was such a beautiful read. I gave it 4 stars, not 5 stars, but not for any reason other than just like the way I felt reading it. But this book was absolutely stunning. I said this in my review on TikTok. You cannot call yourself a fan of literary fiction if you have not read this book, because this book defined literary fiction to its very core. Lit fic is characterized and categorized by the way in which it explores people's stories rather than just a general overarching plot, and this book did this in the most incredible way possible. And do you know what, actually I'm gonna change it. I think it's a 5 stars. The more I speak about it, the more I realize actually I think it's a 5-star read. The way that the prose is structured and written is a way that as a reader you enjoy, and as an author you envy. That's the best way that I can put it. As a reader, I had a great time. As an author, I was furious that I didn't think of some of the sentences he thought of. There are moments where he starts a chapter and ends a chapter with the same sentence, but over the duration of the chapter, the sentence means a different thing. And I don't know what more I can say without spoiling it because it's such a short book, but I really, really recommend reading it. I then reread the entire Hunger Games trilogy. I haven't read that series since I read them when they were released, i.e. over 10 years ago. And I thought, with Sunrise on the Reaping coming out, and I'm sure you remember my little freak out on my 5 for 25 video saying I really wanted to read Sunrise on the Reaping. With that coming out, there is no reason for me to not finally reread it now, especially because it was Haymitch's story, and Catching Fire specifically really explored Haymitch's story. So I reread that entire trilogy. I didn't reread Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes because I read that last year and it's still pretty fresh in my mind. And then I read Sunrise on the Reaping. The first thing I want to say about Sunrise on the Reaping, while I really, really enjoyed it, specifically from a nostalgic perspective, I feel like it was a little bit rushed. I don't know how best to explain it. It's not a commentary on the author's talent, it's not a commentary on the story itself, but rather it felt a little bit rushed just in terms of the writing. Because I had just finished reading the trilogy and I remember distinctly how the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was written, I could very clearly tell the writing was very different in this story, and not in terms of maintaining voice, but rather just it felt rushed. And on top of that, the next thing I want to say is I didn't cry reading this book. Not because it's sad, but mainly because I feel like there's nothing I read in this book that I haven't seen on the news in the last 2 years. I've cried my tears. Everything I read in this book I've seen happen in one way or another, and I've cried my tears for those. That doesn't mean I didn't enjoy the story, but it just meant that it felt incredibly dystopian reading this book and then putting it down for my social media break to see what I was seeing. And it's I didn't have... This is not to comment necessarily on people that did cry at it. A lot of people might be a lot more in touch with their emotions than I am. But it just feels to me, I've been watching this happen for 2 years now in real life. I didn't have any more tears left to cry. I do feel some of the characters that were in the story weren't necessarily relevant. No, sorry. I take that back. All of the District 12 people that were linking with one another makes sense, because District 12 is literally this small. There is one school in the district. It makes sense that they are all tied in. I feel like Effie being a part of the story wasn't necessarily needed because, I don't know, I feel like, I don't agree that the story was fan service, but I feel like Effie being a part of it was fan service. But other than that, I did really enjoy it. I did still give it a 4.5, 5 stars, but I just feel like I would not be an authentic reviewer if I didn't give you those thoughts. So, yeah. Then I read Sympathy Tower Tokyo. I actually expected a lot more from this book based on the premise and based on how pretty the writing was at times, but I don't really have any real relevant criticism for it, as much as it is just that I didn't enjoy it that much. And I hate to say it because I did have a lot of high hopes and the cover is absolutely stunning, but I just didn't enjoy it. I was bored for a lot of it. I found myself having to stop myself from skim reading and skipping lines, skipping pages. I was just bored. Finally, I haven't actually finished this book yet, but I wanted to get my Q1 review out quickly. I'm reading Blood Slaves by Marcus Redmond, who was very kind enough to send me a link to the NetGalley arc. And I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I don't want to give a review. I don't want to get too deep into it because I'm literally 45 pages into the book and it doesn't feel right to give a review on how I'm thinking or how I'm feeling, be it positive or negative, until I finish the book. But I just wanted to speak about it because I wanted to get it on your radar because the premise of it is phenomenal and the author is a great guy. And I really just wanted to let you guys know about the existence of this book. And I'm probably going to finish it in the next week, so I'll probably talk about it soon in my next reviews. But that was my Q1 reading wrap up. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've read any of these books, let me know in the comments. If you haven't read any of these books but you want to read those books, then read them and let me know in the comments, and see you soon.